It is 2 a.m. The world outside has slowed to a crawl, but inside the perimeter of your skull, the atmosphere is electric with an unwelcome vitality. Your mind is not a temple of rest, it is a stadium of shouting voices. You sit there, perhaps the amber liquid in your glass catching the low light, or perhaps merely bathed in the sterile blue glow of a smartphone, a modern-day digital vigil. And then, as he always does when the defenses of the day have crumbled, he shows up. That version of you from 15, 20 years ago, the ghost of your own history. You look at him through the sophisticated, high-definition lens of everything you have acquired since, the VP titles, the technical expertise, the hard-won optimized life. From this vantage point of safety, you see only his ignorance, his recklessness, his agonizing naivety. You feel a cold, sharp resentment. You think, with a bitterness that tastes like ash, if he had just been smarter, if he had just been braver, I wouldn't be this tired today. You are conducting a retrospective on a life that is still being lived, judging the protagonist of the first act from the comfort of the third. But as we sit here in this liminal space between midnight and dawn, let us invoke the perspective of a Stoic emperor. Marcus Aurelius would look at your agitation and remind you that the past belongs to the category of adiaphora, the indifferent. In the Stoic ontology, there is only the present moment, the hic et nunc. The past is no longer within the jurisdiction of your proherses, your faculty of choice. To the Stoic, the past is as indifferent as the weather or the movement of the stars. It is indifferent not because it didn't matter, but because it has no power to dictate your virtue now unless you perversely grant it that power. By grieving over what that 20-year-old did, you are attempting the impossible alchemy of rearranging the dead. You are treating the past as a living entity that can be litigated, when in reality, it is a ghost that only has substance because you provide the blood of your own attention for it to drink. Let's descend into the specifics of your haunting. Think back to that night in the server room. You can still smell the peculiar ionizing scent of ozone and overheated silicon. The air conditioning was a relentless, low-frequency roar, a subterranean hum that felt like the heartbeat of the corporation itself. You were a tech lead then, or perhaps on the precipice of becoming one. A critical deployment had gone sideways. The screen was a terminal of cascading errors, a digital hemorrhaging that only you could stem. In your pocket, your phone vibrated, a notification, a video file from your spouse. You didn't watch it then, you couldn't, you were indispensable. You were the architect of the uptime. You spent 4 more hours in that fluorescent-lit purgatory, bathed in the flicker of the monitor, chasing a bug that felt like a matter of life and death. When you finally stepped out into the pre-dawn air, your eyes burning, you watched the video in the parking lot. It was a blur, a shaky, low-resolution capture of your daughter taking her first steps across the living room carpet. She was laughing, reaching for a world you weren't currently in. Now at 2 a.m., that memory isn't a data point, it's a wound. You see the flicker of that monitor as a symbol of your misplaced devotion, and the blur of that memory as the price of a soul-crushing bargain. You apply the cold logic of a balance sheet to that moment and find yourself bankrupt. You despise that man for choosing the server over the step. Take a breath, let the air fill the quiet of the room. Think of your own server room, that place where you traded a moment that would never return for a metric that no longer matters. Feel the weight of that trade, but do not judge it yet. Just observe the ghost of that choice standing in the corner of your mind. Or perhaps your haunting takes place in a boardroom years ago during the death throes of your first major venture. You can still feel the texture of the mahogany table under your palms, cold, hard, and indifferent. You were facing your investors, men and women whose eyes were like calculators, stripped of empathy, looking for their ROI in the ruins of your dream. You had to tell them the capital was gone. You had to explain how the disruptive vision had collapsed into a pile of mounting liabilities. In that moment, your stomach turned to lead. It wasn't just the fear of failure. It was the visceral, ontological shame of being found out. You felt like a fraud who had finally run out of runway. At 2 a.m., you look back at that version of yourself and you see a failure. You see a man who wasted years of his life and other people's trust. But in the language of Adlerian psychology, we must challenge this causality. Adler would argue that your past does not determine your future. Only the meaning-making you engage in right now does. You are using that failure to justify your current cynicism. You are telling yourself that because you once lost, you must now be hypervigilant, joyless, and risk-averse. But that man in the boardroom wasn't a failure. He was a student in a classroom that cost $1 million to attend. He was standing in a thick fog, holding a plastic sword, trying to fight monsters, market shifts, timing, hubris, that he didn't even have the vocabulary to name. Exhale slowly, locate that feeling of light in your own history. the moment you had to admit you weren't enough. Notice how you have carried that lead as a burden rather than melting it down into an anchor. Is that failure still defining you, or are you just using it as a shield against trying again? Now look at where you are. You reached the summit. You are the VP, the C-suite executive, the success story. But tonight, the office feels like a gold-plated cage. You remember a younger version of yourself. Perhaps he wanted to be an architect, a musician, or a writer. He had a wasted dream that didn't fit into a 5-year plan. You sacrificed that dream for the fortress you live in now. You sit in the cold silence of the office at night, surrounded by panoramic views of a city that looks like a circuit board, and you feel an inexplicable hollow in your chest. The title on your door feels like a gravestone for the person you intended to be. You resent that younger self for not being strong enough to protect that dream, or you resent the current self for being weak enough to trade it for a paycheck. Adler would tell you that you are not a tree that denies the seed. The wasted dream wasn't a detour, it was the fuel. The sensitivity that made you want to create art is the same sensitivity that makes you a visionary leader now, but you have learned to despise vulnerability. You have built a life where failure is no longer an option, and in doing so, you have bleached the color out of your existence. You are judging the soldier for blighting, even though his blood is the very thing that bought you this high-altitude safety. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the gold-plated cage around you, the expectations, the titles, the relentless need to be optimized. If you could strip away the VP title, who is the person left sitting in the dark? Is that person allowed to be vulnerable? Is that person allowed to forgive the reckless dreamer they used to be? You have spent years acting as the harshest prosecutor in a trial where you are both the defendant and the judge. You deal in data and optimization, and you have applied that same cold logic to your soul. You treat your life like a balance sheet, and you view your 20-year-old self as a bad investment. But hear this, you are a masterpiece painted on a canvas of his mistakes. If you hadn't stayed in that dead-end relationship too long, you wouldn't have the grit to hold your boundaries today. If you hadn't lost that money, you wouldn't have the perspective that makes people respect you in the boardroom now. He didn't fail to become you. He sacrificed himself so that you could exist. True success, the kind that brings peace at 2 a.m., does not come from the next promotion or the next zero in your bank account. It comes from the teleological shift of Adlerian thought, realizing that your past is not a prison, but a library. It is a collection of stories whose endings you are still allowed to rewrite. Imagine him now, sitting across the room in this Stygian silence. He is exhausted. He is confused. He is waiting for you to deliver the verdict he's heard 1,000 times, that he was a fool, a failure, a disappointment. Instead, I want you to perform an act of radical Stoic mercy. Walk over to him, look at his plastic sword in his bleeding hands, tell him that you've reached the fortress. Tell him that the indifferent past is settled. Tell him, I'll take it from here. You've done enough. The path not taken is a ghost. Stop chasing ghosts and start living in the house that boy built for you with his own sweat and his own ignorant courage. You are not behind in life. You are exactly where those catastrophic decisions needed to bring you. The trial is over. The prosecutor has left the room. It is just you and the silence and the forgiveness you have finally earned. Rest now. We'll talk again in the silent room. Good night.